professionals, this class will be useful, friends, for everybody, because when you are attempting your exam, then there are concepts not from practical point of view but also from theory point of view, that you should understand concept. Question can be in the descriptive form, or it can be in multiple choice question, or it can be in a practical form. So it's very important that you understand what is GST and how various provisions are applicable. So today we will study some basic concept about GST, so that you can understand all the provision relating to GST. So friend, this class will be useful, and if you have any doubt, then you can comment. So let's start today's class. But before starting this class, let me give you some important information that I am also taking live classes of GST and income tax on unacademy.com/plus website. Here you have to choose CA exam as your goal, and you can get 10% discount on your subscription if you will use referral code CASATBIR. So friends, please subscribe these classes and recommend to your friends and relatives also, so that they can study online. There are so many benefits of taking education through Unacademy. You can learn from your favorite teacher, you can participate in dedicated doubt sessions. With one subscription you can have unlimited access to all subjects of CA exam online. A real-time interaction with the teacher can be done. You can ask doubt in live class and clear your doubts, and you can download the videos and watch offline. So even if you missed a particular class, then you can check recording of that class and can join that class. So friends, these are the benefits of Unacademy Plus subscription. So I highly recommend you to join these classes. And if till today you have not joined YouTube channel of Unacademy, so you can join this channel CASBIR. Link is in the video description. Button is there in this video to subscribe this channel. So please subscribe to this channel. You will be getting this kind of update regularly on this channel, not from me but also from other educators also. So friends, what is taxable event in GST? Tax can be imposed only on taxable event. So tax becomes payable when liability to pay GST arises. When liability to pay tax arises, and liability to pay tax arise by the happening of the taxable event. So you are not required to pay GST when goods are manufactured. Similarly, you are not required to pay GST when the goods are stored in your factory premises. You are required to pay GST when supply is happening. So supply is a taxable event under GST. We will study this in detail. So it's very important that you have to pay GST as per the taxable events. So even if you have not made sale, but you will be required to pay GST, because now GST is not on manufacturing of goods or selling of goods or supply of or selling of services. It is on supply of goods and supply of services. So friend, this concept is very important for you. So let's study this concept. Goods and service tax means a tax on supply of goods or services, or both, except tax on supply of alcohol liquor for human consumption. This definition is given in Article 366 12A of the Constitution of India, which was inserted so that the goods GST can be levied both by the center and the state, because before GST goods were manufactured and excise duty were levied by the central government, and when the goods were sold, then the VAT tax were levied by the state government. So in order to ensure that both the center and state government levies GST, a new entry was inserted. We say that a tax on supply of goods and services is the taxable event, but there is no GST on supply of alcohol liquor for human consumption. So sale or manufacture word is not used in this definition. So even if suppose a person is having a branch in Punjab and another branch in Haryana, they are making supply to one another, then they are required to pay GST because they are supplying to one another. They are, even though they are not selling, because no customer is involved in this transaction, but still GST required to be paid. Second is, in these definitions, consideration not required for the supply, as you can see, but under GST, when we will see the definitions, that there are certain supplies for which consideration, even though not paid, it will be treated as supply. So we will study this concept in detail. So what is the charging section in GST? Section 9 of the CGST Act says that subject to Section 9(2) of the CGST Act, we state that the GST on petroleum product will be leviable at later stage. So as of now, GST not there on petroleum products. So except that entry, there shall be levied a tax called Central Goods and Service Tax on all intra-state supply of goods or service. So if goods are supplied or services are supplied within state, then intra-state GST is levied, that is CGST and SGST has to be paid. And if there is an interstate supply for one state to another state, then instead of CGST Act, IGST Act will apply, Integrated GST Act. Except on supply of alcohol liquor for human consumption. Again, in this definition of Section 9, alcohol liquor for human consumption, there is no GST on it, on the value determined under Section 15. So GST has to be paid as per the value that will be calculated as Section 15, which we normally say the transaction value has to be adopted. But then there are cases when we will see valuation rule, that is in case of related party transactions are there. Suppose a person, husband is doing business and wife is also doing business, and they are supplying to one another, so they are the related party. So the transaction value that they are declared will not be accepted, and we have to refer valuation rule. And what is the maximum rate of GST that can be levied under CGST Act? It is 20%. It cannot exceed 20%. So GST rate are notified by the after recommendation of GST Council by the central government, and state government also separately notify GST rate. So but maximum CGST rate cannot exceed 20%, and maximum SGST rate cannot exceed 20%, as may be notified by the central government on the recommendation of GST Council and collected in such manner as is may be prescribed. So whenever the word prescribe is written in any act, then it means that you have to refer the rules that are framed, that how GST will be collected, which we will be studying in coming classes. So friends, if you have any question or any doubt, then you can ask me through comment on this video, or on unacademy.com on my profile Satbir Singh, you can search. So here supply under GST, there are various type of supply. So GST not on the sale or manufacture, rather it is on supply. So what is supply under GST? It can be taxable supply. Second is it can be exempt supply. So taxable supply can be taxable supply other than zero rated supply and zero rated supply, which we will be studying in the coming slides, that we will discuss today. So when the goods or services are subject to GST, then it is called taxable supply. But when GST, although the goods and services are supplied but no GST levied, then it is called exempt supply. Again, taxable supply can be of two types: taxable other than zero rated supply and zero rated supply. Friends, if goods and services are exported out of India, then they can be exported without payment of GST or with payment of GST, or they are supplied, or these are supplied to the person in special economic zone unit or special economic zone developer. Then also there is no GST, or you can pay with GST or without GST and then claim the refund. So zero rated supply can be of two types: zero rated supply on payment of tax and zero rated supply without payment of tax. So we will study this concept that when you can pay with payment of tax and without payment of tax. Again, let's study exempt supply. Exempt supply means so friends, here exempt supply can be nil rated supply, wholly exempted supply, or non-taxable supply, or non-GST supply. So friends, when goods and services, on goods and services when nil rate is specified, then it is called nil rated supply. As of now, on goods no nil rate has been specified, but on services nil rate has been specified, so no GST is charged on this. Wholly exempted supply, there are certain supplies which are wholly exempted. Separate notification are issued for goods and services which are exempted from GST. And another is non-taxable supply or non-GST supply. Even if goods and services are supplied, it will neither be supply of goods nor supply of services. Like transportation services are supplied when to the deceased person, then it is not taxable. It is mentioned in the schedule which is attached to GST Act. So we will study this concept in detail. So what is charging section in GST? Section 92 of this is GST Act says that the GST on supply of petroleum, crude, high-speed diesel, motor spirit, natural gas, aviation turbine fuel shall be levied with effect from such date as may be notified by the government on the recommendation of the GST Council. So there is a separate provision under IGST Act also, and it is similar provision, and parallel provision is also there in State GST Act. So whenever you study GST Act, you have to refer 4 Act. First one is the State GST Act, then Central GST Act, then Integrated GST Act, and then Compensation to States Act. So these are the product on which as of now there is no GST, but GST can be levied on future date on these products also. So friends, applicability of GST depends upon whether the supply is made within India or supply is made outside India. So if there are the export and import, then IGST has to be paid, or when these goods or services are imported, then the importer has to pay IGST on the reverse charge basis. If the supply is within the state, then it can be the supplier by the supplier to the recipient. In that case, CGST and state GST will be payable. Suppose the supply is by the person who is in Patiala to the another person who is in Bathinda and they are in Punjab. So CGST and SGST will be payable. Suppose the person is in Chandigarh and he supplied to the another person in Chandigarh, then UT GST and CGST will be payable because Chandigarh is a union territory. So in this case no state GST is there, rather Union GST Act will apply. So there are the union territory with the legislature and without legislature, like Delhi and Puducherry are the union territory with the legislature. So in that case there is a state GST Act. But in case of like Chandigarh, there is no state legislature. So in this case, Union Territory GST Act will apply. So when the transactions are supplied from one state to the another state, in that case, goods or services are supplied, then supplier supply to the recipient who is outside the state. In this act, whether the goods are supplied or services are supplied, IGST has to be paid. So friends, Section 7 of the GST Act says that for the purpose of the GST Act, the expression supply include all form of supply of goods or service. So it is not that only sale is covered, rather whether there is a sale or a transfer or a barter, exchange, license, rental, lease, disposal, made or agreed to be made, even though the supply has not been made. Suppose even if you have paid advances for services, although services have not yet been supplied, but you are required to pay GST on this advance because these are agreed to be made for a consideration. So for supply there should be a consideration only, then it can be supply. But again there are the transactions which are mentioned in the schedule 1 which are made without consideration, that is even if no amount is paid or price is paid for these transactions, even if it will be a supply, which we will study. And it should be made for a consideration by a person in the course or furtherance of business. So if there is no business and the activities are supplied, so it cannot be termed as supply. So there should be a supplied in the course or furtherance of business. The definition of business is very wide under GST, and if you will refer this definition, then there are many entities that are covered. Even if the government supply the services or charitable institution supplies services, even then it is said to be doing business. So second important thing is that importation of service for a consideration whether or not in the course or furtherance of business. If services are imported from out of India for a consideration, then it is also supply, and in this case GST is required to be paid by the person who is importing those services under reverse charge basis. So schedule 1 says that what are the activities or the transaction on which even if no consideration is paid, GST is required to be paid. So these are the comment on section 7, that the definition of supply in section 7 of the CGST Act is inclusive definitions. Thus any supply of the goods and service would be covered even if not specified in section 7(1) of the CGST Act. So it is an inclusive definition, not exhaustive or definitions. So any other supply can also be covered. All supplies should be made for a consideration in the course of furtherance of business, and import of the service will be subject to GST even if not made in the course of business. So for import of service, it is not necessary that it should be for the purpose of business. Suppose charity activities, import of for charity activities there, even then GST required to be paid. Supplies from the point of view of the person who is supplying and not the person who is receiving the receiving the supply. So you have to see what from the point of view of the supplier, not from the point of view of the recipient. So if the individual is selling the old jewelry, he is not in the business of selling the jewelry, so no GST will be payable in this case, because it is not in the course or furtherance of business. So friends, the scope of supply will differ and will depend upon whether all supplies are there, import of services are there, or schedule 1 is there. So if all supplies, whether goods or services are supplied, it should be for a consideration and it should be in the course or furtherance of business. Then it can be termed as supply. But for import of services, whether for business or not, it would be termed as supply. And in case of schedule 1 supply that we will discuss, even if they are made without consideration, then they will be treated as supply. So these are the supply between the related person. So even if no consideration is there, it will be termed as supply and GST required to be paid. So why definition of the business is important under GST? Excise and service tax law do not define the term business. Before GST there was Excise Act and Service Tax, and the business definition was, business term was not defined in that, but under the GST Act this definition has been defined. So GST levies on supply undertaken in the course or furtherance of business. Section 2 of the CGST Act says what does the business include. Business include not only trade but also trade, commerce, manufacture, profession, vocation, adventure, wager, or any other similar activity, whether or not it is for pecuniary benefit. So for benefit is not necessary. If any activity is done of this nature, so it can be termed as business. This is the first clause of this definition. So wager is also included in the definition of business to impose GST on betting transactions. Second term that is included in the business is any activity or transaction in connection with or incidental or ancillary to subclause A. So if any activity is incidental to this activity of trade, commerce, manufacture, which is incidental, that will also be termed as business. Any activity or transaction in the nature of subclause A, whether or not there is a volume, frequency, continuity, or regularity of such transactions. So even if a person do transactions for the month of say April, and thereafter for May and June he didn't do any transactions, he cannot say that he is not doing business. He has done business only for 1 month. So volume of the transaction will not matter. Frequency will also not matter, whether for 1 month, 2 month. Continuity will also not matter, whether you are doing continuously or after the gap of 1 month, 2 month. Regularity is not required. Thus, even if a one-time transaction can also be termed as that the person has done a business. So it is a very wide definition. supply or acquisition of the goods including capital goods and services in connection with the commencement or closure of the business is there. So if goods including capital goods and services on account of closure of the business are supplied, suppose a unit of the business is closed and all the asset and liabilities are transferred, then it can also be said that there is a transfer and GST is required to be paid. So another provision is that provision by club, association, society or any such a body of the facilities or the benefit to its member for a subscription or any other consideration. So even if the member supplies, even if the club supply goods or services to its members, then it will also be termed as supply. It cannot be termed that the person is supplying to himself. So club, association, society or any body which is supplying this facility to the members, it will also be termed as supply. So under the Income Tax Act there was the concept of mutuality, that the members and club are the one and same thing, so the person is supplying to itself, so income tax should not be levied. But under GST it has been clarified that the member and club are the two separate persons, so it will be termed that they are doing business if they are supplying some facility to its member. Admission for a consideration of the person to any premises. Suppose there is an exhibition and fees is collected for participating in that exhibition or event, then you are collecting fees or you are entering into a hall, so that will also be termed as supply. Services supplied by a person as the holder of an office which has been accepted by him in the course or furtherance of his trade, profession or vocation. Suppose a chartered accountant also accept as an assignment of director of a company, so in that case also it will be termed that he is doing the business. Example, say in practice provides service as an independent director, the service provided by him may be termed as business and not employment in this case. So another activity that has been inserted here, that is substituted here by the GST Amendment Act 2018 with effect from 1st February 2019, was the activity of a race club including by way of totalizer or a license to bookmaker or activities of a licensed bookmaker in such club. So before these definitions, this definition as you can refer in the below screen. So these were the definitions. The service provided by a race club by way of totalizer was there or license to bookmaker was there. But now this definition, these words has been inserted, activity of a licensed bookmaker. Any activity or a transaction undertaken by the central government, a state government or any local authority in which they are engaged as public authorities is also terms as they are doing the business. So in this case, responsibility to pay tax in respect of the service by the government is covered under reverse charge mechanisms, that the recipient of the service is required to pay GST in most of the cases. Thus even if the central government or local authority supply these services, then they are also termed as business. Another important definition that we have studied in this is the consideration. Consideration is in relation to supply of goods or service or both, includes any payment made or to be made, whether in money or otherwise, in respect of in response to for the inducement of the supply of goods or service or both, whether by the recipient or by any other person, but shall not include any subsidy given by the central government or state government. So even if the payment is made or to be made, whether it can be in money or otherwise, so even if in kind some item is received, suppose the person A gives item A and person B in return give the certain other item, so even if this is not in money, it is in otherwise, even then it is said that this is a consideration. So consideration can be paid by the recipient also or by any other persons. So even if you supply to Mr. A but Mr. B makes the payment, so in that case it is not necessary that the consideration should directly come from the recipient. But if any subsidy is given by the central government or state government, it will not be a consideration. So the monetary value of any act or forbearance in respect of, in response to, or for the inducement of the supply of goods or service or both, whether by the recipient or by any other person, but shall not include any subsidy given by the central government or state government, provided that deposit given in respect of supply of goods or service or both shall not be considered as payment made for supply unless the supplier applies such deposit as consideration for the said supply. It means that if security deposit are given and which are refundable after the supply is made, so no GST required to be paid. But if security deposit are given and when the supply is made, it is adjusted from the supply, so GST will be paid from this, required to be paid on this deposit also. So friends, now the government has said that in case of supply of goods, advance payment is received, then in that cases you are not required to pay GST at the time when you are receiving advance payment, but you are required to pay GST only when you are supplying goods. But in case of services, you are required to pay GST even if you are receiving advance for the services. So here are the important concept relating to consideration definition. Consideration therefore is not the amount that the recipient pay, but is the amount that the supplier collect, whether from the recipient or any third party. Consideration can be in the form of the money or otherwise. For example, under a joint development agreement model, the flats handed by the developer to the landowner will be considered as consideration for the development right given to the developer by the landowner. So there is a difference in deposit and advance. Where deposit have been applied as a consideration for supply, it can be called as advance. So we have studied this concept, that when can the deposit be termed as advance. So these are the Schedule 1 activity which are given in the Schedule 1 of the GST Act. We say that activity to be treated as supply even if made without consideration. That is, even if permanent transfer or disposal of the business asset where the input tax credit has been availed on such asset. So for example, you have machinery and you have availed input tax credit, and now you want to sell that machinery, then even if you will dispose of for a zero value, then you are required to pay GST. So you cannot transfer any asset on which input tax credit has been claimed, even if for a zero value also. So you are required to pay GST on that. Supply of goods or service or both between related person or between distinct persons as specified in section 25 made in the course or furtherance of business. So for example, husband is also doing business and wife is also doing business, so they are the related person as per GST Act, and so whenever they are making supply to each other, although no price is charged from that goods or services, but even then they are required to pay GST. Similarly, suppose the person is having the branch office in Punjab and another branch office in Haryana. They are termed as distinct person for the purpose of GST. They will be having two different GST number and they will be required to pay GST, although no consideration is charged by the Punjab branch from Haryana or Haryana branch from Punjab branch. And so provided that the gift not exceeding 50,000 rupees in a value in a financial year by an employer to an employee shall not be treated as supply of goods or service or both. So friends, if the employer provides subsidy to the employee, it is termed as supply even if no consideration is charged. But when the employee provides subsidy to the employer, it is not supply under GST, and so GST not required to be paid. However, it has been specified that if the employer give gift to the employee in a financial year up to rupees 50,000, then it will not be termed as supply under GST. However, in this case, when the gift are given, then you are not required to pay GST, but you are required to reverse input tax credit, because you cannot take input tax credit on gift or sample that are distributed. So what is the definition of related person in GST? It is given in section 15 subsection 5 of the CGST Act. it is not given in section 2. Normally all the definitions are given in section 2, but in this related person definition is given in section 15, which says transaction value concept, how GST has to be paid. So following person are deemed to be related, although they are not related. It is not that only the family member are deemed to be related. Officer or director, the one another business are deemed to be related. If they are the legally recognized partner in the business, they are related person. If they are the employer and employee, they are related person. If they are directly or indirectly owns or control or hold 25% or more of the voting stock or share of both of them. So 25% or more should be the holding, then they can be termed a related person. If they are directly or indirectly controlling the other, if they are directly or indirectly controlled by third person, suppose Mr. A and Mr. B are controlled by Mr. C, then all of them are related persons. Suppose Mr. A and Mr. B directly control the third person, that is Mr. C, they are termed a related person, and they are the member of the same family, then they are related person. What is same family? We will discuss here. So you can also refer the explanation that is given, that person who are associated in the business of one another, in that one is the sole agent or sole distributor or sole concessionary, howsoever described of the other shall be deemed to be the related person. So sole agent, sole distributor, if the transaction is done by the person with these, then they are the related person. So what is the related person? We have discussed it, but what is the meaning of the same family? So family means the spouse and the children of the person. So it is not written that the children should be the major or minor. So if the spouse and the children of the person are the family, as well as parents, grandparents, brothers, sister of the person, if they are wholly or mainly dependent. So in the second clause, their dependence is there, that if their parents are independent, grandparents, brother, sister, then they will not be considered as the family. But spouse and children, whether they are dependent or independent, it doesn't matter, they will always be considered as the family. So any transaction between them will be termed as a transaction between related person. So even if no price is charged for this, then GST will be required to be paid. So what is distinct person? Section 25 and section 25 subclause 4 and subclause 5 of the GST Act says that a person who has obtained or is required to obtain more than one registration. So even if the person is not required to obtain, but he has obtained registration, whether in one state or union territory or more than one state or union territory, shall in respect of each such registration shall be treated as distinct person for the purpose of this sector. Suppose the person is dealing in Punjab only, and for Patiala office he has taken separate GST number, and for Bathinda office he has taken separate GST number. So Patiala office and Bathinda office will be treated as distinct persons. So whenever they will be making supply to each other, then they will be required to pay GST under the GST Act. Subclause 5 says that where a person who has obtained or is required to obtain registration in a state or union territory in respect of an establishment has an establishment in another state or union territory, then such establishment shall be treated as establishment of distinct persons for the purpose of this Act. There is the person is having the establishments in Punjab and he had taken GST number in Haryana. So these two establishments will be treated as separate establishments. So here is the comment that supply of goods to own branch or division with distinct GST number is there, then interstate stock transfer, branch transfer will be subject to GST. So even if the goods are not supplied, in this case only stock is transferred, say from Punjab to Haryana, then it is a supply under GST and GST required to paid. And interstate stock transfer, branch transfer will be subject to GST if there are separate GST registrations. Suppose Patiala office and Bathinda office are having separate GST number, then any supply between them will be treated as a supply and GST has to be paid. But if there is no separate GST number, then transfer from one office to another office within the state is not liable for GST. So supply of service by head office or one branch division to another will be subject to GST. Example are services supplied by the head office of the bank to the branch with separate GST number. So certain activities are performed at head office, like software is purchased, which is commonly used by all the branch offices. So GST is required to be paid on this transaction. Although it will not be reflected in the books of account, or no journal entry will be passed in the books of account, but GST will be paid on these services that are provided by head office to branches having separate GST number. Here, fringe benefits supplied to the employees even if no recovery is made. Example, meals supplied in canteen should be subject to GST. If free transport, free car or free telephone is supplied as perquisites, GST should be payable on the basis of the open market value. Services supplied by establishment of the person in India to own establishment out of India is exempt, because there is a notification number 9/2017 in Tate tax rate which say that services supplied by establishment of a person in India to own establishment out of India is exempt if the place of supply is out of India. Suppose SBI Bank is having a branch office in Singapore and you supply the services to that branch where the place of supply is out of India. So it will be exempt from GST. So friends, there are the free sample. The circular was issued by the GST department to claim input as credit. So there will be no GST on free food supplied in Anna Kshetra run by religious institutions. Further, prasadam supplied by religious places like temple, mosque, church, gurdwara attract nil rate of tax. However, input tax credit will not be available in this case. This was clarified by the press release by the Government of India. So there are Schedule 1 supplies, that activity to be treated as supply even if made without consideration, Section 7 of the GST Act as per which a supply of goods by a principal to his agent, where the agent undertake to supply such goods on behalf of the principal. So if the principal supply the goods to the person who is his agent, then it will be liable for GST even if no separate consideration is charged for that. Or if the agent supplied to the principal, where the agent undertake to receive the goods on behalf of the principal, it will be a supply and GST has to be paid on this. So what is the meaning of principal and agent here? Principal means a person on whose behalf an agent carries on the business of supply or receipt of goods or service or both. So he authorizes the agent to sell the goods on his behalf. Suppose the principal directly sell the goods and the other person is only receiving the commission. So the other person is not receiving the goods or services goods, and in that case he is only a commission agent. He is not receiving the goods. So accordingly treatment has to be made. Agent means a person including a factor broker, commission agent, arhita, del credit agent, an auctioneer or any other mercantile agent by whatever name called, who carry on the business of supply or receipt of goods or service or both on behalf of another. So person who supply the goods or service or both on behalf of other taxable person, whether as an agent or otherwise, required to take registration under GST even if his turnover is nil, because or even if his turnover is below 20 lakh or 10 lakh per annum, because he is required to take mandatory registration under GST. So such registration is required only in case of carrying a forwarding agent who stock and sell the goods on behalf of the principal. So registration is not required for ordinarily commission agent who do not deal in goods or services, because they are just the commission agents and the goods are directly supplied by the principal to the customer. They are not received at the premises of the agent. Another services that is covered here or transaction is import of service by a person. So now a person word has been written, not by taxable person. Earlier the person word was to be read a taxable person before 1st February 2019, but now the government has amended this clause. that import of service by a person from a related person or from any of his other establishment outside India in the course or furtherance of business will also be termed as supply, even if no consideration is charged for that. Suppose a person is architect in India and he has a brother outside India who is also architect, and the person's avail his services in India for the purpose of his business, then GST required to be paid, even if no payment will be made by the brother who is architect in India to the brother who is outside India, because the service has been used in the course or furtherance of the business. So services are supplied by establishment of the person in India to own establishment of out of India is exempt because there is notification. The service supplied by establishment of person in India to own establishment out of India is exempt. Activity or a transaction to be treated as supply of goods or supply of services. So where the certain activity or transaction constitute a supply in accordance with the provision of section 7, they shall be treated as either supply of goods or supply of services. So you have to refer schedule 2, which says that which activity will be termed as supply of goods and which activity will be termed as supply of service. So this is the schedule 2, which says that how you will treat the transaction to be supply of goods or supply of service, because there are different GST rate for supply of goods. For supply of service there are different GST rate, and the time of supply provisions are also different for goods and for service. So sometimes there are the transactions which are of combined nature, which have both the characteristic of goods and of services. Like if services are provided in a restaurant, then on the one hand food is supplied, and on the other hand waiter services and all other services are there. So whether it will be supply of goods or supply of service, it is clarified in schedule 2 that any transfer of the title in the goods is a supply of goods. Any transfer of right in the goods or of undivided share in the goods without the transfer of the title is a supply of service. So renting of one locker by the bank, share taxi, etc. are all example of supply of service. Any transfer of title in the goods under an agreement which stipulate that property in the goods shall pass at a future date upon payment of full consideration as agreed is a supply of goods. It is not supply of service. So in case of finance, lease and hire purchase agreement are there, then they will be treated as supply of goods, not supply of service. In case of the land and building, any lease, tenancy, easement, license to occupy the land is supply of service. Any lease or letting out of the building, including a commercial, industrial, residential complex for business or commerce, either wholly or partly, is supply of service. For example, residential flat is given to the company. Treatment or process. Any treatment or process which is applied to another person's goods is a supply of service. Example is job work and testing services. Transfer of business asset, where the goods forming part to the asset of the business are transferred or disposed of by or under the direction of the person carrying on the business, so as no longer to form the part of those assets, whether or not for a consideration. Such transfer disposal is supply of goods by the person. So this will be supply of goods, not supply of service. So transfer the business asset, there is subclause B, that whereby or under the direction of the person carrying on a business, goods held or used for the purpose of the business are put to any private use or are used or made available to any person for use for any purpose other than a purpose of the business, whether or not for consideration. The usage or making available of such goods is a supply of service. Example is goods of taxable person like motor vehicle, residential premises, guest house, telephone, laptop, etc. for private use of partner, director, executive and employees. So if these is there, then this will be a supply of services only. Where any person ceases to be taxable person any goods forming part of the asset of any business carried on by him shall be deemed to be supplied by him in the course or furtherance of the business immediately before he ceases to be a taxable person, unless the business is transferred as going concern to another person, or the business is carried on by personal representative who is deemed to be a taxable person. So as if the person transfer his unit as a going concern, then it will not supply. So service by way of transfer of going concern as a whole on an independent part is exempt from GST, because there is an exemption notification 12/2017 which say that suppose a unit 1 of a company is transferred along with asset and liabilities, so as a going concern as a whole, so it is not liable for GST. What are the transactions which will be regarded as supply of services? Following shall be treated as supply of services, namely renting of the immovable property. If the renting is there, it will be supply of service and GST has to be paid on as per the supply of service provisions. Similarly, construction of a complex or building before completion is also supply of service and GST has to be paid. So construction of a complex building, civil structure, part thereof including complex or building intended for sale to a buyer. If it is intended for sale to buyer only, then wholly or partly, whether fully or partly, except where the entire consideration has been received after issuance of completion certificate. So the builder has made a building and he received the consideration after completion certificate of the building, then that amount will not be chargeable to GST. But if before completion of the building he received any amount, then it will be chargeable to GST. We are required by the competent authority or after his first occupation, whichever is earlier. So either building should be completed and there should be completion certificate, or it should be first occupied by the person, whichever is earlier. So for the purpose of this clause, construction will include any addition, alteration, replacement, remodeling of any existing structure also. So you know that only the new structure should be there and existing civil structure can also be there. Apart from this, what is the meaning of competent authority that we have discussed here? That the certificate should be issued from the competent authority. Competent authority means the government or any authority authorized to issue completion certificate under any law for the time in force, or in case of non-requirement of such certificate from such authority from any of the following. So normally completion certificate should be received from the authorized person of the government, but in case it is not required, then you can receive from an architect who is registered with the Council of Architecture, Chartered Engineers, with the Institution of Engineers, licensed surveyor of the respective local body of the city or town or village or development or planning authority. So there can be a temporary transfer or permitting the use or enjoyment of any intellectual property right. Then this will also be supply of service, like allowing the use of trademark, copyright, design and patent is there. So it will be supply of service. So the GST rate applicable to service or time of supply of service provision will be applicable. If there is a development, design, programming, customization, adaptation, upgradation, enhancement, implementation of information technology software, like development of software is there, then it also supply of service and GST has to be paid as per the treating it as a service. Agreeing to the obligation to reform from an act. This is very important because normally penalties are imposed on the contractor if he didn't complete contract on time. So it will be chargeable to GST because he is agreeing to the obligation to refrain from an act or to tolerate an act or a situation or to do an act. For example, demurrages, LD charges, notice pay, penalty for violation of the contract are imposed on the contractor. So GST has to be paid on all these recoveries. Transfer of the right to use any goods for any purpose, whether or not for a specified period, for cash, deferred payment or other valuable consideration. Example are renting of laptop at extra. So it will be supply of service only, because you are transferring here right to use this laptop for any purpose. In case of the composite supply, sometimes the two or more activities are provided. So how the supply will be treated? So following will always be treated as supply of service in case of work contract, immovable property cases. For example, a contractor takes a contract of a building and all the material, labor, textile are supplied for construction. So where property and the goods passes on the transfer of the property, so it will be work contract for, but it is related to immovable property only. Suppose a person has taken a contract of painting of a car. So in that case he will be using his material as well as he will be supplying his service. Since it is not related to immovable property, it is an movable property, so it will not cover under work contract definition. Supply by way of or as part of any service or in any other manner whatsoever of goods, being food or any other article for human consumption or any drink, where such supply or service is for cash, deferred payment or other valuable consideration. So what will cover in this definition? Supply of food, home delivery of cooked food, all these will cover, and it will be treated as supply of service only. So following will be treated as supply of goods. Supply of goods by any unincorporated association or body or person to a member for cash, deferred payment or other valuable considerations. So if goods are supplied by these association to its member, by club to its member, then it will be supply of goods. Apart from that, there are certain supply which will be treated as neither supply of goods nor supply of service. So irrespective of anything contained in section 7(1) of the CGST Act, following will not be treated as supply of goods or supply of service. That is, items that are covered in Schedule 3, activity of the transaction undertaken by the central government, state government or any local authority in which they are engaged as public authority as is notified by the central government. So what are the transactions that are not covered in Schedule 3? These are the that are covered in Schedule 3. These are the transactions that this will be treated neither supply of goods nor supply of service. Suppose service is by an employee to the employer in the course or in relation to his employment. It is neither supply of goods nor supply of service. So service by the employer to the employee are not exempt, but service by the employee to the employer are exempt from, are not chargeable to GST. So fringe benefit are in relation to the employment and hence outside the GST. Salary to partner is not subject to GST. It is also clarified by CBC. So question in your exam can come in this form. Ram has received a sum of ₹5 lakh from his employer on premature termination of his contract of employment. The GST implication will be, it is not a supply, hence not chargeable to GST. It is a supply without consideration and hence not chargeable to GST. It is a supply, hence chargeable to GST. It is not supply, but exemption is there. So which one is the correct answer? You can pause recording of this lecture and thereafter you can replay once you arrive at correct answer. Here correct answer is A, that it is not a supply, hence not chargeable to GST, because it is in the course of employment this service has been provided. Termination of the contract is there relating to employment. So the second service, that is neither supply of goods nor supply of service, is supplied by any court or tribunal established under any law for the time in force. So the term court here include district court, high court and supreme court. So no GST has to be paid on these services. Similarly, no GST has to be paid on the function performed by the member of parliament, member of state legislatures, member of panchayats, member of municipalities and the member of other local authorities. The duties performed by any person who hold any post in pursuance of the provision of the Constitution in that capacity. Duty performed by any person as a chairperson or a member of or a director in a body established by the central government or a state government or local authority who is not deemed as employee before the commencement of this clause. Service of a funeral, burial, crematorium or mortuary, including transportation of the deceased. So when the person dies and transportation services are provided or mortuary services are there, funeral services, no GST has to be paid on this. Sale of land is there, sale of building is there, so no GST has to be paid. But if it is before completion or issuance of occupation certificate, then it will be liable for GST. But after completion of building, it is not liable for GST. So any actionable claim is there, no GST has to be paid, but GST has to be paid on lottery, betting and gambling. So these are the transactions that are covered in Schedule 3 of the GST Act. So friends, question can be asked in your exam. Service of transportation of deceased is under GST. It is taxable, not taxable, partly taxable and partly exempt. Taxable if transporter is registered. So you can decide and thereafter replay this lecture. Here correct answer is 2, that is not taxable. Transportation of the deceased under GST is not taxable. Apart from that, there is item number 7 that is covered is supply of goods from a place in the non-taxable territory to another place in non-taxable territory without such goods entering into India. Suppose the persons transfer the goods, purchases the goods from China and is selling those goods in USA, then no GST has to be paid because these are from non-taxable territory to non-taxable territory. Similarly, another entry has been inserted in this is the entry number 8, which is inserted by CGST Amendment Act 2018 with effect from 1st February 2019. Supply of warehouse goods to any person before clearance for home consumption. So if goods are still in the custom warehouse and goods are supplied to another person, GST not to be paid. Supply of goods by consignee to any other person by endorsement of document of title to the goods after the goods have been dispatched from the port of origin located outside India but before clearance for home consumption. Thus in case of high sea sales, if the goods are still have not come into India or not cleared for home consumptions and the goods are supplied to another person, no GST has to be paid because it is neither a supply of goods nor supply of service. So activity and transaction covered under Schedule 3 are not exempt supply. Section 73 deal with the proportionate reversal of input as credit when taxable person is making both taxable and exempt supply. So input as credit has to be reversed relating to exempt supply and only input as credit relating to taxable supply can be claimed. So value of the exempt supply shall not include the value of activity or transaction specified in Schedule 3 except sale of land or sale of building after completion. So value of an exempt supply per section 17(3) will be value of land and building shall be taken as the same adopted for stamp duty value, and value of security shall be taken as 1% of the sale value of the securities. So section 17(5) define which activities are to be. Section 17(3) that for exempt value you have to exempt supply value, you have to reverse input as credit, so you have to reverse it. So friends, these were the few concepts that we have discussed today. In the coming classes also we will discuss some more concept. In the meanwhile, you can subscribe to unacademy.com/plus website subscription, and if you will use referral code CASATBIR, you can get 10% discount. Here we are taking all class relating to GST, income tax and other topics of CA exam. So there are so many benefits that we have discussed that you can learn from your favorite teacher. You can participate in dedicated out session. With one subscription you can have unlimited access. You can also do real-time interaction with the teacher. You can ask doubt in live class. You can download the videos and watch offline. So friends, subscribe to these classes by using referral code CASATBIR and subscribe to this YouTube channel of Unacademy plus CASATBIR. Thank you friends. In the coming days also I will be taking these classes on this YouTube channel. I am also taking GST classes from 12 PM to 1 PM on unacademy.com/plus website, and income tax classes from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. in the evening. So join these classes and get the benefit of online education from Unacademy. Let's crack the exam. Thank you, friends.